Welcome to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered with Perry Clark. This program looks at mental health from unique perspectives and shows you how to manage your life by finding the knots that help you and stay away from the ones that could be a disadvantage. Now, here is your host, Perry Clark.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. I'm Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist, and I'm here with in my continuing series from Comic-Con. Now, I just want to remind everybody as a disclaimer that this is a educational and informational podcast and for entertainment as well. This does not constitute working with a mental health professional, and I strongly recommend seeking out a mental health professional in your area to work on your unique issues. So as I said a moment ago, that this is a continuation of what all came from going to San Diego Comic-Con and speaking at the panel. And today's guest, which we have two of them, and this is probably going to be a two-parter episode, were both people that I had a chance to sit on a panel with and sadly missed the other person's panel, but we're definitely getting to talk about their work as well, since Comic-Con was what brought us together. And so today's guests are Tara Madison Avery, and sorry, I can see them on the screen as I'm about to say names. It's making me laugh here. I believe it's pronounced Awanja? Awan.
Yeah.
Mance. Okay. So let's start with Tara. So Tara Madison Avery is a cartoonist, editor, illustrator, and publisher of Stacked Deck Press. She was co-editor and publisher of and contributing artist in the Ignatz Award.
Ignatz, yeah.
Ignatz.
He's a character from Crazy Cat, a very important comic strip, and
gotcha.
And now it's named in his honor. So.
Gotcha. Award-winning We're Still Here, an all-trans comic anthology, and the first book of its kind. Her comics and illustrations work can be found in anthologies such as Anything That Loves, Comics Beyond Gay and Straight, Death Saves, Fallen Heroes of the Kitchen Table, and The Other Side, Trans and Non-Binary Comics. Avery is also the cartoonist behind the webcomics Dirty Heads and Gooch, which predominantly features LGBT characters. She is a longtime LGBT activist, having been a board member of the nonprofit organization Prism Comics for over a decade, and as the chair of the Los Angeles Bi Task Force from 2013 to 2015. She was invited to take part in the White House bisexual community briefing. And our other guest, Awan Mason, is a professor of English at Mills College and an instructor in the illustration and comics programs at California College of Art. Their illustrations and comics have appeared in several collections, including We're Still Here, winner of the 2019 Ignatz Award for Outstanding Anthology, Drawing Power, winner of the 2020 Eisner Award for Best Anthology, Manopause, a comic treatment, winner of the 2021 Eisner Awards for Best Anthology. She votes from Chronic Books, COVID Chronicles, a comics anthology, and others. Awan is the author of and illustrator of the upcoming Living While Black, Portraits of Everyday Resistance. This summer, their 1001 Black Men Online sketchbook project was released in book form as 1001 Black Men Portraits of Masculinity at the Intersection from Stacked Deck Press. So welcome both to Untying Knots.
Hello, it's great to be here.
It's a pleasure to have both of you. So my standard question is, and whoever wants to go first, how did you get here?
How did I get here? I guess if we're talking about California, I was in Kansas about 14 years ago, and my dad called me up and said, trucking company, the family business was in trouble. I need you to come back to California. So that's how I got back to California. But if it's how I got to comics, I've been drawing comics my whole life. Been reading comics ever since I could read, and I've just I think that in the mid-aughts, around 2005 or so, I decided to, after having not drawn a thing for several years, just embraced the notion of a webcomic, and I did Dirt Heads, which was inspired by the life I guess I was living in Lawrence, Kansas, the Austin of Kansas, and it's about overeducated and underemployed 20 and 30 somethings who live in a college town. Some of them are queer, and so it became kind of a thing. It actually began to attract a following, and of course, as soon as it attracted enough people to provide me with any sort of revenue, I moved back to California and started working at my dad's trucking company. So because I'm smart like that. So here we go. Yeah.
Well, you both answered the call that was before you, but still managed to make it work for you.
Yeah,
the joys of webcomics.
Yeah,
the joys of webcomics. You can do it from anywhere.
That's right.
Yeah. And what about for you?
Well, I guess I could say, how did I come to California and how did I come into doing comics? I'm an English professor. I'm from the Northeast, grew up on Long Island, went to high school outside of Albany, New York, upstate, and never thought I'd leave the Northeast, but academic life takes you where it takes you. And after grad school at University of Michigan, I came here in 99. Well, actually, first with a stop at Eugene, Oregon for 4 years of professorship there. And I've been at Mills College since 99. And it was something about being a professor that made it really clear to me that art had to be a part of my life. I always describe myself as a lifelong artist and writer, and often tell people that I've been an artist longer than anything except Black. I've been Black longer than I've been an artist, but that's about it. And so as I built my academic career, I also started building my art practice, did a lot of painting for many years, and then kind of got into the zine community. I think I must have gone to the San Francisco Zine Fest just as a attendee, and just saw this really amazing place where all of these artists came together to create their own work on their own terms and sell it directly to their chosen audiences. And so I started doing an art, a series of 1,001 portraits of Black men, which grew over the years. I started doing zines of those portraits. I started doing other kinds of zines, all illustration based. And then up with people like, comic creators like Justin Hall and John Macy and Ed Luce. And, in particular, Ed Luce and John Macy explained step by step how you do a comic and said, you should do these. And so I started doing comics in 2014, and that's how I met Tara. And here we are today. I've been able to publish a book with Tara. I also contributed to some of Tara's anthologies and amazing coloring books, and have met comic community that they feel an awful lot like my people. And so it's been really a wild ride, and I love this part of being an artist.
Beautiful. Well, why don't we start with some of the more recent stuff, which was Comic-Con, and then we can talk a bit about Stacked Deck as well as your book from there too. So how does that sound?
Okay.
Sounds good.
All right. So what was it? Sorry about that, folks. What was it like for you guys being at Comic-Con and presenting there?
Well, for me, I've been at Comic-Con for quite some time now. This is probably I've been there every year. It's been on since 2006. So, and I went twice in the 90s. It was a very different show. You didn't have the Hollywood element, the same kind of Hollywood influence that you have now. But this was in many ways a very busy show for me. I moderated 2 panels and appeared on 2 others, which one of those was with you, Perry.
Yep.
One of Lorraine Garrison's chock full of mental health goodies and neurodivergent and LGBTQ insight, and we did that at the public library, which was a first for me. But I also moderated a panel about LGBTQ webcomics, which I know a little bit about. And then we brought the trans panel back. We had the first trans panel in a few years, which we'll probably continue to do because that seems to be a popular item. And then and I worked at the booth with Prism Comics. I've been a board member of PRISM, a 501c3 nonprofit organization that promotes LGBTQ, AIU, Alpha, Beta, Gamma Rho, comics creators, fandom from coast to coast, and so part of we're a working board. We don't just sit around and say, well, this is what we ought to do. Now you guys go do it. Mm-hmm. We are rather active in lugging boxes and grunting and sweating and doing things like that. So we I spend a lot of time selling books and running the register and just sort of being the lifeguard on duty in case anything required a decision from an experienced individual. Yes.
And what about your experience? Because sadly, I would have come to your panel, but we had flown home on Sunday.
I started going to Comic-Con in 2010. Bought tickets as a gift to my partner. It was easy to get tickets back in and have pretty much gone every year until 2019 because I had a family reunion, and then I missed a couple of years because of the pandemic. So it was great to be back. I just, even though I don't live at Comic-Con, it's only a week every year. Going back feels like going back to a really familiar place. And it was wonderful to see how much it hadn't changed. And how, the fact that I loved the COVID protocols that were there. It made me feel like, yes, this is my community and it cares about me. And it was just great to connect. We had such a great discussion on the panel about queer Black popular culture, queer Black in popular culture. The audience was super engaged, and also, people show up at Comic-Con to learn stuff, to ask questions, to offer their opinions, and I found that to still be the case, maybe even more so, both on the panel and during my signing hour at the Prism Comics table. Had some great conversations with people, even people who didn't buy my book. We had a great conversation about the project, and people were curious and interested. And so definitely time well spent. Very nice. I had 14,000 steps on Sunday alone. So.
Oh, I know. Yeah, that more than doubles your numbers. Yeah, my partner and I were very exhausted after that weekend. But if it hadn't been for the panels, I never would have gone as well. It was on my bucket list of things to go and do, let alone present there. And as Terry, you mentioned Laron.
Actually, no, she pronounces it. It's weird. She pronounces it Lorraine. I think there was like some sort of. It's like when the name was on the birth certificate, it was one of those little oversights. But her name is Lorraine. But it does look like I was calling her Lauren forever, and then until she finally took me aside and said, "It's Lorraine."
She is in some of my earlier episodes. You'll find it. I believe it's episode 7 and episode 10, and then on you were on with Sean, who was recently in my Pride series. I think that was episode 25 or 24. At this point now, I'm starting to confuse all the numbers. But that was definitely an experience being able to present that varying materials, because again, this is media that normally, I know when I was growing up, I would have had to sought high and low just to find. And so what does it mean to start bringing that type of material more prevalent and being more, shall we say, accepted into environments like this, as opposed to being, this out of the way convention or zine? What's that like?
I guess I can speak about that. It's great. It's it's great to be able to find an audience, and what I find in something like at Comic-Con, and the Comic-Con audience and community intersects with the community I've encountered at things like the LA and San Diego Zine Fests, San Francisco Zine Fest, is people who are open to story. And I don't know what Comic-Con was like, say, 25 years ago. I think you could actually get tickets then, but what I find in my own experience is and I've been pleasantly surprised, because when you're an artist, you sit and you make your work and you think, this is really important to me. But it's always wonderful to see that actually it resonates with other people. And so people who are open to hearing a new story and being persuaded by some aspect of either what you put into making it or what it looks like it could be, and wanting to give it a try. I mean, that's what I think is so great about Comic-Con, is, bringing together all these people who are really interested and willing to stick their toe in the water of the unfamiliar. And a real appreciation for art, or really appreciating the opportunity to talk to people about what they do and why. And someone who's there just to talk about superheroes will show up and say, well, this is not that, but yeah, sure. And that openness is really, I've encountered that. I expect to encounter that at Zine Fest. It's kind of considered alt culture. But I think that I tell other artists that they, you'll find that at Comic-Con San Diego as well. And it's really, it matters a lot.
What about for you, Tara, especially with the work that you do with Prism?
Well, I guess John Macy, Awan mentioned him earlier. He was also at one point a board member of Prism, and Prism does several shows a year, and then I do several shows a year representing myself and Stack Deck Press. So John described this going from city to city to convention to convention as sort of the carny lifestyle, where you bring your banner and you bring your wares and you set up and you start barking to the crowd, hear ye, we have comics, and so that is sort of an aspect of my life. I've been doing this for some time now, and like this year I will have gone to 13 different shows, which is probably won't do as many next year, because they do take a bit out of you, especially if you work the show. I mean, as you mentioned, 15,000 steps, that's true. We call that being in convention shape. Like we were all a little surprised at WonderCon this year, after having been out of the convention loop for a couple of years, that we were exhausted after WonderCon. I said, you got to get back into convention shape, and so, but yeah, it is even more of an endurance contest if you are working the convention, if you are there for business purposes, because you have to be there when the floor opens and you have to stay while the floor closes, and these other things. But it's also a fantastic thing. You get to meet people in different parts of the country, and especially when you represent an LGBTQ organization, you go to places that people might casually describe as flyover country. Kansas City, the place I grew up in my teens and 20s, and you go to a show like Planet Comic-Con there, a very nice show, very nice mid-sized show, and you put out the LGBT panel and it's packed, because you're the one you came from California and you're talking about queer stuff, and they all show up, and then they all rush to your table after the panel to buy a book and say thank you for coming. It is a very nice feeling. That being said, though, most of my barnstorming adventures are confined to the West Coast, although I did just get back from C2E2, my very first Chicago. I was invited to speak there. I did not table. I did not bring my wares and my shingle. I just brought myself. I brought my wallet and my comics habit, and so that was, but that is sort of the carny lifestyle. You're finding new people. You are reaching out. One of the things I like to do is when people come up to me, and especially young folks, because young folks and older folks don't always read the same things, aren't always plugged into the same things, and they say, have you read such and such? It's like, no, tell me about that. Where can I find that? It helps me expand my perspective. They don't always ask me the same things, which is, but I guess they'll learn, but they don't probably want to know about Little Orphan Annie and and Wash Tubs and Captain Easy and Dead Bone Erotica, but I could tell them about that if they wanted.
Yeah, well, it's kind of the equivalent of what's a rotary phone that we're seeing with things like Stranger Things and such.
So there were comics in the newspapers. Yes. There were newspapers. Yes, there were newspapers. You've seen pictures. Yeah, they have them.
Yeah, anytime you watch a period piece, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah. So why don't we talk a little bit about Stack Deck, because that is what has been permitted so much to be produced. How did Stack Deck come into existence? Because this is also one of those aspects that we don't generally get to see and hear about how companies like this get created.
It was a big accident. So Prism Comics for quite some time administered a queer press grant, and we had a selection process, and we would evaluate the applications, and we would award a $2,000 grant to a promising comics creator every year. And that had lasted at about, by 2014, it had hit its 10th year. And we wanted to do a publication that celebrated the queer press grant. However, we had a publisher lined up, another publisher by another former board member of Prism, Northwest Press, but they, for reasons that, they just didn't have the time and resources to publish this book. So it kind of, it just was like, we thought the project was over, and they said, well, who's going to publish this book? And so I was still at the trucking company at the time, and we had a shell corporation that was at one point it was a harbor freight corporation, at which I was the dispatcher in Southgate, California, the only non-native speaker of Spanish in the room, and we hadn't really used it for much of anything, but kept paying $800 a year to keep it alive in case some use came up. And so I said, I'll be a publisher, and I took this company. I re-registered it with the Secretary of State of California as a publishing company rather than a freight company, and got a DBA and called it Stack Deck Press, and thus I was publisher. And so I took it upon myself to publish Alphabet. We had a successful Kickstarter for it, and we had quite a few people, including Awan, who contributed to it, many of whom were former Prism Queer Press Grant recipients. Many of those people who received the Prism Grant went on to very impressive careers in comics. Ed Luce was among them, Steve McIsaac, Elizabeth Byer, you name it. So then from that on, then we had John helped me put together Alphabet. John he's always at the ground. He's always at the ground floor of a lot of this stuff. And then I got an idea from one of my partners, Lorianne, because she was into the adult coloring craze. So maybe we should do a coloring book. And I thought it would be like, we could do like some sort of like little ash can kind of thing stapled together. And John said, why don't we just do a whole proper coloring book? And thus the LGBTQ historical coloring book series was born with the Queer Heroes coloring book, and which continues to this day. And so, so it has gone through. I go to shows. I look for people whose work I find interesting, try to see who needs a publisher's assistance or wants it, and make mental notes and try to come up with new ideas for books. We've got 3 more books coming this year, and already 2 on the docket for next year. So
very nice. Well, I think that's a perfect place for us to take a break here, and we can move into and we'll come back and move into talking about 1001 Black Men from there. So why don't you stay tuned, folks. This is, and come back for our second half as we delve into this very brilliant and beautiful book that we have here, and its creator and its publisher on our second half. So I'm Perry Clark here with Tara Avery and Awan Mance, and we'll be back shortly.
Our lives and the world around us can get messy and frustrating. Untangle and Grow Counseling's focus is to untangle that mess and make sense of it so you have a good foundation to build and grow from. Visit us on the web at untangleandgrowcounseling.com. Perry Clark offers individual psychotherapy, couples and family therapy, and adolescence therapy from a variety of coping materials and resources. Visit untangleandgrowcounseling.com for more information. You are listening to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. If you have a question or comment about our podcast, send an email to pclark@untyingnotspodcast.com. That's pclark@untyingnotspodcast.com. And now, back to the program.
Hello, all. Welcome back to Untying Knots. And this is the second half of our probably multi-part episode here. I'm Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist, here with Tara Avery and Ajuna Mance. Better this time. And now we're going to talk a bit more about 1001 Black men's portrait of masculinity and intersection. So I'm curious what inspired this coming together, and then we're going to talk a bit more about some of the sections I've been able to read in the book.
Well, I have, included Ajuna in a lot of my publications. I've always enjoyed her art, and I've always admired her comics. And in my travels, I will be selling books, coloring books, and anthologies featuring her work, alongside those of others. And I found myself in far-flung, obscure places like New York and Kansas City, and there would be folks that would be browsing my wares, and they would see Ajuna's work, and they'd say, "Oh my gosh, 8 Rock?" And I was like, and I immediately, it took me about half a beat. That's Ajuna. They're talking about Ajuna. So when I realized that she had a following that extended across the country, I thought, not only did I enjoy her illustration series, but I thought this might be able to reach a broader audience in book form. And I just thought it was an important series, and it deserved, a treatment, like an art treatment. And that also had other elements to it that would really draw in maybe the person who's not an arts follower, other kinds of writing.
Gotcha.
And I would definitely say, working, Tara has given me some great opportunities to have my work seen more widely, and in the process meet some really interesting artists and comic creators. And so when Tara approached me and said, "Hey, it's probably maybe like 3 years ago or so, maybe more like 3 or 4 years ago," and said, "Hey, I think this can be a book." I thought, I would love that. I had originally thought, I'll make a giant zine every 250 drawings. That didn't happen. I made much smaller zines whenever I felt like it. And I thought, what a great opportunity for this to be. And Tara said, "We'll have color," and I'm like, "Color, yay!" And so it was great to actually have someone who, I didn't have to be Kehinde Wiley. Famous Black portrait artist, beautiful work, very expensive work. But I didn't have to be Kehinde Wiley to have a full color book of this project that had meant so much to me.
As my partner and I were looking at it last night, he was pointing out that, you can tell where you were taking sketches from people you saw at that because of the backgrounds that were in that, since he was familiar with that artist as well.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's awesome. I'm glad you picked up on that.
Yeah. And it's just also one of his particular liked work. So that's like, you found that. Thanks, hon. Love you. Kisses. But I want to read a couple of passages here that are in the foreword that was originally written by Sean Taylor, a senior fellow Pop Collective collaborator and member of the Nerds of Color. And they wrote here that Ajuna Mance's portraits of Black men as who they are, in their element, in their fullness of themselves. This, to me, is revolutionary. Many depictions of Blackness are hyperbolic or exalted. One could argue that some of these magnified images are addressed for the near constant denigration of Blackness in the public sphere. Think of the majestic Blackness of Kindy's, Wiley's. Other artists highlight, say, the complications of race and gender through near mystical folk aesthetics like Waganchi Mutu. Awan's work is akin to stained glass. The bold black line is used to turn the image into multiple sections. Normally, when black bodies are reduced to sections, it is a method of control or dehumanization of the body, a tactic to make the black body easy to consume. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Mance's technique feels more like an assemblage than portrait making. She carefully puts black men together in a way that honors our agency. Her sections forces the viewer to see the whole as well as the parts. The technique calls to the multidimensionalness of black male life, the life that is under and beyond the stories projected onto our skin. While all artists have baggage and bias, she seems to have kept this out of her work. Granted, there is bias in the curation in the subject she chooses to present. There is also a love for the subject, not the possessive kind of love so prevalent in many kinds of art, but the love that allows you to appreciate what something is without having to force it to conform to how you see the world. This is a very rare approach, especially when representing Blackness.
I like that, Sean Taylor.
Yeah.
It very much speaks to something that many people probably wouldn't even begin to process with the aspect of how we are represented. So what was, for those who eventually we want them to get the book, and in a nutshell, what inspired this work?
I'm an English professor by profession, by my day job, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
and my training. And one of my main areas of research is representation. And I'm particularly interested in how what Blackness looks like when Black people themselves do the representation. But I also was thinking a lot back in 2010 when I started my series of 1001 drawings. I was thinking about the ways that even mainstream Black representations of African American people are really constrained by the fact that there aren't that many mainstream spaces for Black people to talk about themselves. And so I was looking at certainly mainstream non-Black media. And particularly, I was interested in how Black men are represented in very excessive ways, excessively athletic, excessively criminal, hypersexualized, and that doesn't really leave room for most Black people. And then I see other kind of counter representations in Black media trying to say, that's not what Black men are like. But so many of those representations are of men who are very wealthy and, kind of look like supermodels in a very traditional sense, and leave out the really kind of profundity and the beauty of everyday Black men, the people that I see when I walk around my community. And so I foolishly said to myself back in 2010, I, as a queer Black person in a very long-term relationship, I can draw Black men with absolute objectivity. Because I want nothing but for Black men to be themselves. And so I thought, I'm going to immerse myself in the subject, and I'm going to attempt to draw Black men on Black men's own terms without projecting any desires or aspirations onto my subjects. And so I embarked upon this thing that I thought would take 3 years. It ended up taking 6.5 years. But it came from a place of what I saw as, and continue to see as, a lack of the discussion of the ways that Black men are objectified. When people talk about objectification, they're talking about white women. I'm a child of the 70s and 80s, and I remember the Swedish bikini team selling, beer and during football games on, televised, and people think about that objectification of white women's bodies. But Black men's bodies are objectified, and they're used to sell ideas. They're used to sell ideas like fear, divisiveness, masculinity, particular products, and that's if that's and it proceeds because it's unseen and unaddressed.
Very much so, because I know there was the I forget exactly what year it was, but there was that one with some of the photo shoots that I think were I think it was LeBron James.
Oh boy, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
since I admit, for those of you who like sports, I'm not a sports ball guy, so I can't remember all of this. But I know it was one of the athletes, basketball player, and they had the aspect of him holding the basketball, and he had a woman on his arm that was wearing a dress that was reminiscent of a King Kong
Yeah.
um, uh, advertisement from I think the 1920s. And just that what you're saying about that aspect of looking at either the dangerous or the power that's something that now needs to be caged.
Right. It was that was one hugely problematic representation in the 2000s, which is particularly shocking. And then, one of the things that I will point out when I teach about Black male representation is that, a lot of times when you see Black men depicted, often they're depicted shirtless. And, often, shirtless with shaved heads, which is a style. But also, I have to think in some ways that's, kind of extra bare, to really almost to go back to the phrenology of the 19th century, using, the shape of the head and bumps on the head to tell, if this is really a person or not, just wanting to give the gaze on Black men's bodies as much surface area as possible. And it's, as someone who's grown up around Black men, my dad and my brother, my dad had 4 brothers and 3 sisters. So I had a lot of aunts and uncles by birth and by marriage who mean a lot to me. I have 6, but I have 15 first cousins, several of whom are African-American men. And, I associate Black manhood and masculinity with a lot of love and safety and humor and joy. And I want to weigh in on, and not fear. And I feel like that perspective doesn't get enough air. And there's also the anxiety of representation. So, when Black people seek to kind of create affirming art, which is very beautiful, a lot of it, there's a beautiful sentiment behind it. But then I'm also concerned about the Black men who don't get to be seen because they don't necessarily show up as, say, positive representations. And so I was trying, and it was the learning curve for me. But I was trying to include the full range of people, including the people who don't necessarily show up as, our talented 10th.
Right. Well, it's very much the aspect of everyone who's actually in between the aspect of the, like you said, supermodel GQ to the ones who are being villainized as our criminals, where there's a space in between where the rest of us live.
Yeah, right. Yeah, everyday people.
And in that space comes the aspect of how do we live and how are we seen. So let's go to one of the sections and chapters in the book. And since this all came about because of Comic-Con, let's go to the section on nerds. This is particularly Black nerds. So this was a part of you wanted, because I should also point out that on many of these chapters are your interviews with some of your subjects as well. And so this particular section is an interview with London Smith, and this is that's what Black nerd is like, is the section. And this is I think it's his portrait is number 366. But one of the questions you asked was, how would you define a Black nerd? What does that label mean to you? And one of his responses was, let's see here. I think that when you're talking about Black nerds, you're often talking about kids who are fighting to break out of the box of what Blackness means to a lot of people. And in doing so, they're saying, I'm interested in these things over here that people say Black folks aren't supposed to be interested in. For some reason, things like comic books or certain types of gaming aren't associated with Black kids. As a Black nerd, you're constantly fighting against the tiny box that defines what Blackness should be, but you're also fighting to fit into it. Or it might be more accurate to say you're fighting to be accepted into it. the nerd box, even though the stereotypes is that Black people aren't interested in gaming, comic books, and other aspects of geek and nerd culture. It's almost as though you're trying to get out of one box just to be in another one. That's what a Black nerddom is like.
Yeah. And Landon was one of my students when he was a master's student at Mills College, and is a poet and a professor now. And I think one of the best things about his story, which I did not know until I interviewed him many years after he's gone on and built this great career, is that he was a Division I football player at the University of Michigan. I was shocked. And in some ways, that's where he found his footing as a Black nerd, because one of the other football players also liked to geek out with video games with him. And, the idea of, this, there are a lot of Black nerds. It's a huge, proud community growing every day. And yet this idea of what Blackness is Black ain't. What is Blackness supposed to be? What is it not supposed to be? And, as a former, honor student in high school and all that jazz, at a very white high school, I was very accustomed to classmates telling me that what I was doing was not what Black people did. And that kind of projection comes from both outside and inside. I experience it mostly from white students, but the notion of making visible all the nuanced ways. There is no wrong way to be Black. And what I love about Black nerds is that they kind of openly, defiantly hold both of these things. They're doing nerd all the way, but they refuse to do it without bringing that lens of being Black. And it's just exhilarating to see. It's one of the things I love about Comic-Con. There are so many Black people at Comic-Con.
Oh, yes. I was noticing that too.
Probably, thousands of Black nerds in the same place year after year. And I just think it's wonderful. And what I love is, the love that Black nerds have for each other, from the t-shirts, the different things people are cosplaying as, the different ways, the green, black, and red Spider-Man, and when Miles Morales showed up as Spider-Man, that was, the costume of the year, not to mention Black Panther. I mean, but, the project was it was just me trying to draw a whole bunch of Black people, Black men, from their all the places where Black men show up, which is pretty much everywhere. But over time, I started to realize I was really focusing on those Black folks who don't get a lot of publicity, but there are a lot of old Black men. There are a lot of queer and trans Black men, and there are a lot of Black men who are nerds, and they never show up on the news. Very few people do TV shows about Black men who are nerds. What would have happened if Big Bang Theory had a Black man among those main characters? It would have transformed a lot of people's perceptions.
Well, and not even too how they treated the Indian character on there as well, which they're just like stuff is like, you could have done more. You didn't have to be the set piece. I mean, you made such an effort of giving all these other guys relationships that worked to some degree, and he doesn't. He's still sitting there without a relationship.
Yeah. I never understood why that happened.
Yeah. Let alone they had a perfect opportunity to say that maybe part of the reason his relationships weren't working is he could have actually been queer.
That would have been a nice turn.
Exactly. Because there's also that aspect of what does a queer nerd look like?
Right.
Well, that speaks to the importance of queer folks and people of color to write their own stories. That if you leave it to corporate entities, they're going to do what they feel will maximize their viewing audience. And if they have any indication or preconceived notion as to what will turn people off and send them away, it doesn't make it in. And it doesn't make it in until we prove them wrong. So.
And that was both a theme, I will say, that Sean was talking about in his interview. And just for transparency's sake, we're recording this right now about mid-August. So this is actually going to air in December. And the episode that is actually airing right now on for my podcast is with Mercedes Salmudio, who is listed in Why Wakanda Matters, the psychological anthology, talking about the aspect of the Oreo and what it means to be a Black geek, especially for a female, growing up as well. So there is definitely a subject matter where I think it's linking in spirit. And so I make mention of this now. So folks, if you want to go back and listen to that one, as you continue to listen to this one, it's an aspect of what does it mean for us to be Black nerds. And equally, one of the other interviews that you should probably hearing around October, Halloween, is with B. Dave Walters, who, as I was talking to him, he and Damien Portier started Talk to Your Black Geek Friend on Geek and Sundry, and which was the only thing that actually caused me to finally get a Twitch subscription so I could watch that, and talking about just how much we're normalizing that sense of our connection with geekdom. And that is normal for us. I mean, and as we often see during Pride Month, or not Black Pride Month, how many of the technologies we're using today, especially the cell phone, is because of Black genius.
And Black nerds are integral to U.S. culture. It's one of the things I love about February. It was started by a Black nerd for Black History Month, as Negro History Week, and just being out. There's one of the things about Landon Smith in the 1001 Black Men book is that he talks about this kind of coming out as a Black nerd process, and we talk about coming out. Identities that are unexpected and for which you may experience rejection, queer and trans identities, non-binary identities, but they can also be very raced. And for Black people, there is, and sometimes there is a fear of rejection when you out yourself as a Black nerd. Less so today than, say, 30, 40 years ago. With huge receptive Black culture, prominent Black nerds in media, but still, locally it could be a thing.
Exactly. And let's hear. There's another passage here that I know gets into that. Give me just a second. I think it's this one. He says, "I'm teaching a class that approaches Black fiction through a critical lens, and I try to emphasize that whether it's historical fiction or futurism, our stories are tied to our own realities. So when you talk about Black futurism, Black sci-fi, and speculative fiction, these stories are connected to the hope and the experiences that we want to be able to tell or share or embody. I think that creating these stories is a liberatory practice, whether for the individual, artists creating it for themselves, or for the community. I believe that the practice of creating these stories enables us to be able to imagine outside of the parameters that we've been given and the structures imposed on us socially as Black people."
Yeah, the imposition of images either by people who are not Black or by Black people in order to create more access. I guess I don't use the phrase respectability politics often because I think some of it is, kind of a misunderstanding of some aspects of Black history. But I will say there is sometimes the notion that some things have to be represented in a particular way in order for people to be safe, in order for people to have access to a particular space. And, in some ways, my project was to try to leave space for other forms of meaning, for without projecting onto Black men what they should be. I didn't want to be part of that problem, which happens every day. Black men have a very high level of visibility in society. Black women, the problem for Black women and non-binary folks is invisibility. And as a result, not having your needs met, not having your needs recognized as needs, or being told, actually, that's not a need for you. But the hyper visibility of Black men means, U.S. society, and frankly, the global Anglosphere is hyper interested in Black men and Black men's bodies and subjectivity, and just invests Black manhood and masculinity with whatever the larger society needs at a given time. If they need something to be afraid of, if during, say, Super Bowl season, they need something to celebrate, and I often wonder, I'm very humbled by the experience of the Black men I depicted, because I don't, as someone who was assigned female at birth, I don't know what it is like to experience the wages of hypervisibility growing up inside that set of expectations. So it was a really interesting exercise for me to try to depict Black men without projection and with a respect for a path that I have not walked.
Beautifully put. And I think that's a perfect place for us to take our break here as we move in so that we can have our second half, which will be coming roughly 2 weeks after this episode. So for those of you who only have a chance to listen to this episode, where can people find you if they want to basically connect?
Well, you can find 1001 Black Men at stackeddeckpress.com. You can find posts relating to 1001 Black Men and other Stacked Deck Press publications at our Facebook page, or also at Twitter at Stacked Deck Press minus the final E. There's a limit on characters in your Twitter handle. And then on Instagram at Stacked Deck Press. And for my own individual stuff, my own art, you can find that at Tara M. Avery Art on Instagram. And Prism Comics, the organization for which I work, the nonprofit, can be found at prismcomics.org.
Okay, we'll make sure to have all those links in the show notes as well. And what about for you?
You can find me at awanmance.com. And on awanmance.com, I link to the actual 1001 Black Men online project, so you can see the individual posts over the years, and also links to my social media, especially Twitter and Instagram. So awanmance.com.
All righty. So I'm Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist, here with Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. So I'm going to really suggest you come back for part 2 as we continue this discussion. But otherwise, if you have only been able to have a chance to listen to this one, I hope you have enjoyed it. And please share and like. And we'll be back for more. Stay tuned, folks.
Thank you for tuning in for Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. Be sure to join your host, Perry Clark, for another episode on the podcast coming soon on the Voice America Empowerment Channel.